Hello, everyone, and welcome into the Go 24/7 podcast. It's a bye week, but don't tell LSU that as recruiting continues to heat up. Sonny Shipp is alongside me. My name is Bryce Koon. Thanks so much for tuning in. Whether it's on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you're watching or listening, we appreciate your support. Sonny, it's a bye week, but man, LSU over the past, dare we say, 10 to 12 days has just been on fire. We mentioned it kind of started last week with that CJ Jackson, but man, over the past 7 or 8 days, this staff has really gotten down to business and done a lot of work that I think we could say that maybe a lot of people didn't know was coming. We're going to talk about a lot of those names today. So let's start off with one of the first ones. We mentioned CJ Jackson, that edge. We talked about that one in the last podcast, but PJ Woodland and Bernard Causey, two commits that were one, and PJ Woodland to Mississippi State, and then Bernard Causey to Ole Miss. It helps out this secondary, and I think that the LSU staff's just trying to continue to build depth as they grow this room.
Yeah, and you had to replace Andre Evans, who flipped to Georgia last week. And like you mentioned, man, the last 12 days, two decommitments, four commitments, and and it's not over yet. these last 2 months to go down the stretch until the early signing period, it's always eventful, and it's certainly been eventful here lately. But you had to shore up the cornerback position. PJ
Mm-hmm.
Woodland, Bernard Causey, while neither one of them has that sexy appeal that Andre Evans carried as the number 10 cornerback in the country. Both of them are good gets. Both of them, I really like the PJ Woodland. This is no knock on Bernard Causey, but I really like PJ Woodland in the fact that he gives you some versatility. He reminds me a lot of Jay Ward. They had around the same measurables when Jay Ward came out. And I see him being able to play corner, being able to play safety, being able to play nickel, basically wherever you need him. He's versatile enough and he's athletic enough to where you can plug him in the secondary. And in this day and age where between the transfer portal, injuries, kids just acting stupid and getting suspended, you run into situations to where you find yourself like LSU is right now. Basically, okay, who can we move to cornerback? Hey, Javen Taviano, that's a guy
Yeah.
who's getting some reps at cornerback. And so when you have a guy like that who you can play anywhere in the secondary, I just think it's huge. I think it's
Yeah.
huge. It's an added benefit. And I really like that. Bernard Causey, LSU fans have been saying, where is that lockdown corner? Where's that corner we can put out on the island who has who has the attitude, who is, you say cocky, but in a good way, who's
Mm-hmm.
confident enough to get out there and just mix it up and who's going to be in your face. And that's Bernard Causey.
Yeah.
And, his, I think he's an 86 rating. I'm anxious to see how the senior film comes out and whether or not he gets a little bump. But I think you have to like that aggressiveness and that mindset that he brings to the position. And, then you move on from there. You've got last night on Thursday night, the late night flip of Weston Davis from Texas
Yeah.
A&M. And look, LSU fans and Texas A&M fans, they hate each other, man. Anytime they can stick it in each other's side, they're all about that. So the simple fact that it was an A&M flip only sweetened the pot for LSU fans. But, you get an athletic offensive tackle that really just solidifies now what I think solidifies, if you hold on to all these five of these pieces, a very, very, very nice offensive line group for Brad Davis.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about that. Brad Davis, I know you mentioned, and folks can check this out over Go 24/7. You dropped a big piece here on Friday morning, right before we recorded this podcast, just about, all the work that's been going in. And Sonny, if I'm correct, this feels like something that's kind of behind the scenes. I mean, this was something that not a lot of people knew. The conversations were still happening, but maybe how in depth they were between Davis and Davis in this sense. I mean, just kind of talk about that. What does this mean, you think, for I mean, you start to kind of look at what Brad Davis has pulled in over the past couple of years. You go back 2 years ago in the recruiting class with your two tackles that you have starting now. Then you obviously have Zalance Hurd last year, and now it's just something where LSU is starting to build, and with Brad Davis, quite the rapport it feels like with some of the top offensive linemen.
Yeah, and that's been a sore subject amongst the LSU community. uh, prior to Brian Kelly getting here, and really prior to Will Campbell, Emory Jones, and that class has been the offensive line. And now you see them really kind of stockpiling on it a little bit. Weston committed in June or July, I'm sorry, visited LSU in June, committed in July. And it kind of caught people off guard. Steve Wiltfong had a crystal ball in on LSU. I thought it was going to be LSU. And then all of a sudden, I believe it was a Sunday, if I'm not mistaken, pops to A&M and like, whoa, what just happened here? That wasn't something we were expecting. But Brad Davis never backed off. He never backed off. You're talking about a guy who's in Beaumont. So when you start talking about College Station relative to College Station to Beaumont relative to Baton Rouge to Beaumont, you're not looking at much difference at all. Beaumont, you're right there basically on the Louisiana border. So a lot of LSU's had some success in those areas in the past, and so to be able to go and to get that East Texas guy like that at a position of need, you could arguably say LSU really didn't have to have another offensive lineman in this class. I'm a huge proponent of you need 5 in each class,
Yeah.
and obviously that's tough to do, but to be able to complete that flip of something like you mentioned, behind the scenes, not a lot of talk going on about it. We'd mentioned it. Yeah, they were still in contact and stuff. And then I think it was Tuesday night when a source said, "Hey, man, things are really heating up with Weston Davis. Keep it on the download." And then all of a sudden, bam.
Yeah.
So
Pops off
big
Thursday
pickup.
night.
Big pickup. Yeah.
It was kind of crazy. I was at the women's basketball scrimmage last night, and you could see the media there. Everyone, their phone ding up right around the time that you guys had shot the text off to me about this flip's coming. So, man, that's huge. That obviously a big one. Like you said, I'm a big proponent of. There's in every sport, there's certain stuff. I'm a baseball guy, so I'm one of those things. You can never have enough arms. I think in football, you can never have enough offensive linemen. Guys that can be able to be interchangeable pieces. And you get a guy like, you didn't need it, but a guy like Weston Davis, who has that kind of high potential, is not a bad one to say. It's just kind of a cherry on top. Davis is definitely not a bad get there. But Sonny, one of the big things, man, is it doesn't really stop here. You mentioned, I mean, we're closing in on signing day. It's going to be a race here, as a lot of teams, that LSU is going to be in battle with are going to have some questions, I think, going in. How does Texas A&M finish out the rest of their season? Are there staff changes, not necessarily Jimbo, but staff changes in general that could determine some of these battles? Your thoughts, though, on a couple more guys. I mean, look, I know you, in that piece you said you feel like you're beating a dead horse here. We're talking about the battles between the Aggies and the Tigers here, but there's a couple other names I know you're looking at to say, hey, look, LSU's still in that mix, and a guy that recently decommitted also too, and Draylon Miller.
Yeah, Miller goes to Colorado this weekend, and then he has LSU the weekend after that, followed by Colorado. So he'll be in town for the Florida game, and that'll be a second game. His second game this season. And then he also came in June and spent a weekend in Baton Rouge on an unofficial visit when they had a bunch of official visitors in town. So he's certainly gotten the treatment, certainly seen everything, but getting him in for that Florida game, especially sandwiched in the Colorado and the USC visits, I think will be big. And, everything continues to point LSU's way with him. And I think that I just think that they're in a good situation with him. I also think that they're relatively in a good situation with Terry Bussey. And I say relatively just because he's still committed to Texas A&M. There's been some rumblings that he was going to drop that pledge for, I guess, going on about a week now, a week, 10 days. It's kind of like people are on the clock waiting, when does it happen? When does it happen? Kind of makes you feel, you depends on who you believe and who you listen to. Texas A&M has just made, has sweetened the pot, I guess, so to speak, as far as the NIL opportunities, the message board talk and stuff. But, I think that that's definitely going to be one to really monitor down the stretch. And I think I'd mentioned this with Gabe Relaford, but I think it's going to be interesting to see. Okay, November 11th, LSU and Texas A&M have not really had to compete for prospects to visit. November 11th is going to present that opportunity, but because Texas A&M is going to host Mississippi State and then LSU is going to host Florida. And
Yeah.
so those commits who are on the fence, if they're still committed to Texas A&M, where do they show up that weekend? Terry Bussey's one, Gabe Relaford's one, Ty Anthony Smith, the linebacker, who's really good friends with Miller and Davis. Um, so there's certainly no shortage of storylines between LSU and Texas A&M. And look, A&M had A&M beat LSU for the 5-star Dominic McKinley. So A&M is A&M had, when you go and you look, they got McKinley, they got Miller, they got Bussey. It's like they were just laying it to LSU. All of a sudden now it kind of looks like the script is flipped.
Yeah, it's been obviously something to keep an eye on. You mentioned as well, it Texas A&M tried to strengthen their position and try to go after Jelani Watkins if, Draylon Miller does indeed make that decision to go to LSU. Wanted to get this from you here too, though, because there's a kind of, I don't want to say tier 2 necessarily behind Gabriel Relaford, but there are some guys, JUCO guys, got the chance to talk with Jaden Hamlin, guys like Shone Washington, all these different guys that where do you feel like LSU sits in that? Is Gabriel Relaford kind of that option A, and then there's options, B1, B1, or B1, B2, B3? What is kind of the look? Do they really need to add someone up on that front seven?
Well, I think I think you could really make a strong case that, they could use two more guys.
Mm-hmm.
And so given that sense, I could see Brian Kelly, let's say they do get Gabe Relaford. I could see them faced with the situation of, okay, how do we feel about our depth inside? Right? Do we need to go out and do we need to go find a defensive tackle out of the transfer portal? Or do we feel good? Do we feel like we're in a spot to where we can go out and get a guy like Deshaun Washington, a Jaden Hamlin, some guys who are a little bit older, a little maybe a little older, a little bigger, a little
Mm-hmm.
stronger, to where they can come in and maybe not need as much time and as much development in the weight room. I think that's going to be something that that they're just going to have to look at, and they're going to have to kind of evaluate once they get a better picture of where a guy like Gabe Relaford stands. You also got Missouri commit Jalen Brown. He was a guy who was in town for the Auburn game. So he's someone still in play. Elias Williams. Another Missouri commit out of Florida. He's someone else that that they're still talking to as well. So, and then on top of all that, you have, okay, so you don't really, how's the defensive line coach really factoring into these decisions? Given Jimmy Lindsey's situation, is this all Brian Kelly? Without a lot of input from the D line coach. So there's a lot of dynamics in play, and there's certainly been a lot of dynamics in play with defensive line recruiting since since Jimmy Lindsey went down in late July.
Yeah, obviously in that article you need to check out if you haven't already and get your Go 24/7 subscription. Coaches are on the road. Robert Steeples heading down to see Kai Bates. But one thing we were able to talk about last night and into today, and wanted to get your thoughts here as we round out this podcast, was kind of the quarterback situation. Man, that 2025 class, I mean, it's kind of 1A, 1B with guys like Underwood and George McIntyre. Joe Sloan in Nashville last night to see George McIntyre, going to be able to make the trip up to see Bryce Underwood. Just wanted to get your thoughts on the continued recruitment of these guys. And ask you this too. We all know that Bryce Underwood has that kind of January decision date that he's kind of looking at. Does George McIntyre have one? And how quickly, if LSU were to lose out on Underwood, is it pull all the resources and go for McIntyre? I mean, what does this kind of look like to you?
Well, I think if Underwood would go to Michigan, I think you would just have to put you would assume that LSU would go all in more than they already are for George McIntyre, because Joe Sloan has he's made both of them a priority. Like you said, he saw McIntyre Thursday night, going to see Underwood Friday night. Mike Denbrock went and saw LSU commit Colin Hurley on Thursday. And so, they're making their rounds on all the quarterbacks. But after Underwood and McIntyre, there's really only one more 2025 quarterback that they've offered, and he's a kid out of the Midwest who's committed to Ohio State. And so, Sloan has made it. He hasn't even gone out and tossed out any offers just to kind of get guys interested. Basically saying, telling these two, look, you're my guys. You're the guys. You're the focus, you're the priorities. And so, whether what happens with McIntyre. I know he's visiting UCLA this weekend. I'm not sure about
Yeah.
Underwood as far as hitting the road or not. But, like I mentioned in the piece, Underwood, and I mentioned this on the podcast before. I've always felt with Underwood that just proximity to Ann Arbor, man, 25 miles away or 20 miles away, whatever it is, it's just so close, man. That's just going to be so hard to overcome, Now with all this talk about all the sign stealing
Yeah.
allegations and all this fiasco
Yeah.
with Harbaugh, Jim Harbaugh's certainly never been short of drama in his time at Michigan. But man, it just seems like the NCAA now. It's just, and not to say that it's not warranted, because
Yeah.
that's pretty. One, cheating. Hey, all of them do it. But if you're going to be that stupid about it, you deserve to get caught, man. You
Yeah.
deserve
It's
to get
interesting.
caught. And if you're that if anyone's that stupid to think that, oh, Harbaugh didn't have any notion this was going on, let's have another podcast and let's talk about that. But
Exactly.
yeah, how does all that impact Underwood and his camp? Because they're very thorough, they're very detail
Yeah.
oriented, and I can promise you that when they've looked at, that in their conversations, they look at it and they say, okay, well, how long do we think this is going to be? This is going to be. This is going to be. That they're having conversation. Okay, well, what if Harbaugh would leave? What if the NFL comes calling?
Yeah.
What if this turns into an NCAA infractions case or whatever, And so it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, and whether or not those negative storylines just keep popping up over the Michigan program. With McIntyre, most people seem to think that Alabama is the team to beat. It would surprise me if McIntyre chose Bama, just because, you've got Julian Sayin coming in.
Yeah.
You've got Jalen Milroe, what is Milroe? Milroe's a sophomore this year, right? Am I
He
correct
might
in
be a
that?
junior by academically, but sophomore playing wise. Yeah, I think you're right
Eligibility
in that.
wise, if I'm
Eligibility
not
wise, yeah.
mistaken. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, if you've got a quarterback with some experience, whether or not you think Milroe's good or not, he would still be a returning starting quarterback. You got Julian Sayin, and now you're following that up with a guy like McIntyre. It would just surprise me a little bit, just given all the quarterbacks that Bama has signed in the past,
Yeah.
And so that I always circle back to Tennessee and Josh Heupel, and how bad. Not how bad they they need a quarterback, because they've got Nico, and man, you want to try to pronounce his last name?
I'm good. I'm good. I'll
I
reserve
am a
that for the
lever.
next.
I know
That
that's
kid's
how it
good though.
spells. I
Yeah,
know
that kid's got
that's
some
how
good
it
potential
spells.
though.
But he's got a lot of potential, but he hasn't been able to break through this year.
Yeah.
And Tennessee certainly is not a very stable situation as far as quarterback goes, if you've watched Joe Milton in one game,
Yeah.
And so, does that look like a better situation than what he could walk into at Alabama? Now, when you look at LSU, you got Ricky Collins, you got Colin Hurley. You don't have those stars by their name that just that grab your attention, I guess, so to speak.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
5-star. People see a 5-star, their eyes just gravitate towards it. And so, does that look like a less congested path to the field? Maybe it does, but I don't really know that that's going to be as big of a factor, as it could be. So I'm really kind of torn on McIntyre as far as as far as where Alabama stands, and if they are in truly in fact that big leader like they are right now. And for me, Tennessee, I just keep circling back to Tennessee. I keep circling back
Yeah.
to Tennessee and how attractive that has to look. Thinking about what Hendon Hooker was able to do in an offense like that. Granted, two different types of quarterbacks, but so I'm really anxious to see how this comes out of Joe Sloan and the limited contact that he can have with McIntyre on this trip, and just see if anything new comes out of it as far as a timeline. Because right now he hasn't really mentioned a timeline at all.
Yeah, and it feels like, if Underwood is that first domino to fall, you're going to see a lot of programs really start to set their sights on a guy like McIntyre. Maybe that's the plan. Maybe he said, hey, let's let Underwood decide where he's going. And then now, we become the hot commodity on the market. It's free agency, Sonny. I mean, that's
And
what
then
this
you just
thing
hope,
is.
yeah, and you hope McIntyre doesn't say, you know what, I think I want to make that December decision.
Exactly.
Oh, Mardi
Exactly.
Gras is better. Mardi Gras decision sounds better.
That sounds better for LSU fans. You mentioned Tennessee, kid that I've got to see a lot of, Jake Merklinger out of Savannah, Georgia. He's another one that's committed in that 2024 class for them, so he's going to be on campus. So look, it's you look at it two different ways. Some guys say I want the path of least resistance, and others say, hey, I welcome the competition. Let's go play. And I'm sure that Joe Sloan's getting a feel for it, but like you said, you don't want a negative recruit against your own roster. But Sonny, you have to figure, as we round it out right here, you got to figure that Sloan and them are talking about this, saying, hey, look, you go here, this is what's happening. That's what their roster looks like. You go here, this is what that roster looks like. Rosters can look very different in the span of what they're talking about. But man, you know, I keep telling people this, with a guy like Nussmeier, he is a bona fide candidate to be a one and done guy next year. I mean, he could have that path, and I kind of think he will. So it could be where 2025, hey man, you could come in and start, as a true freshman if you come and you have that opportunity. So it's going to be very interesting to keep an eye on as recruiting heats up. But man, it's been quite a whirlwind of a week, and we're going to have a lot of fun covering this up until that December 20th signing day. For Sonny Shipp, my name is Bryce Koon. Thanks so much for tuning into this LSU Go 24/7 recruiting podcast. Make sure to give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and set up those notifications for you when you want to know when we release the latest content. We'll catch you next time here on the Go 24/7